Good evening, dear friends from all corners of the world. Welcome to Dreamize story. Tonight we drift beneath a sky salted with stars, but our journey doesn't begin in the heavens. Not yet. It starts with water. Cool, dark, whispering water. You stand barefoot on a rocky shore, toes brushing seaweed, the tide licking the edges of forgotten time. The moon above is a silver coin dropped into a velvet sky, and every wave that curls toward you carries stories, strange, ancient, and dripping with secrets. One of them, as quiet as a shell's sigh, tells of cancer, not the disease, not even the Zodiac sign, not yet. Right now, it's just a crab, a small, somewhat cranky creature nestled between rocks, claws tucked in like a knight waiting out a siege. You'd hardly notice it if you weren't told to look. But that's often how myths begin, hiding in plain sight, quiet strength, shelled mystery. Also, let's be honest, the occasional sideways scuttle that looks both adorable and mildly suspicious. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, where are you listening from tonight? Let me know your city and local time down below. I always love reading those. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You kneel now, fingers grazing the ridges of a tide pool. Something moves, not fast, not dramatic, but purposeful. A tiny flash of shell beneath moonlight. And in that flicker, you feel something watching back. Not with malice, not even curiosity, just presence. That's Cancer. Not the roaring lion or eagle-eyed hunter, not the seductive siren or the winged horse of inspiration. No, Cancer is the one who waits. The one who protects, even if no one notices. The one who clutches memory like a pearl in a shell. And oh, the world it's about to pull you into. You take a step forward, metaphorically, spiritually, maybe even sleepily, and suddenly, the shoreline changes. The tide recedes, not just in space, but in time. You're walking backward through history, each wave revealing stone instead of sand, bone instead of coral, myth instead of mundane. And there, rising in the east, like a glimmering parenthesis in the night sky, is Cancer's constellation, faint, easy to miss, but centered between two bold stars, Castor and Pollux, the famous Gemini twins. Cancer's not trying to outshine them. It never does. That's part of its charm. See, in ancient times, this part of the sky was seen as the gateway of souls, the place where spirits entered the world, drifting down from the heavens through the Zodiac's watery gate. And what better guardian for that crossing than a crab? Something tough, yet tender, shelled, yet soft, armoured, yet home to its own heart. Historians still argue whether early stargazers intended any of this symbolism, or if we've just gotten very good at retrofitting meaning into bright dots. But hey, humans are pattern-making machines, and we've always loved a good crab story. In Babylon, some of the earliest sky maps already showed a creature in this space. Maybe a crab, maybe a turtle, maybe a sneaky cosmic joke. Fringe scholars even claim that Cancer was originally imagined as a boat-shaped barge ferrying souls across the Milky Way. And who's to say it wasn't both? After all, crabs do kind of look like boats with attitude. You pause at the edge of a ruined temple now, waves lapping against its weathered columns. The scent of salt mingles with distant incense. Somewhere, a priest chants names of stars like their prayers. Acubans, Taf, Al-Nathra. None of them scream crab, but together they shape the celestial shell that Cancer wears like armor. Inside, Ancient carvings tell a story. A small creature, a battle, a god, a reward. It's not quite clear. There's erosion and possibly some artistic license, but the image lingers. A tiny defender, a fallen helper, a celestial echo. The air grows heavier now, and the moon slides behind a cloud. Your thoughts feel slower, softened by the sound of tide and time. You begin to sense what makes Cancer so compelling. It's not flashy, it's not famous, it's the quiet backbone of the Zodiac, the silent sentinel, the friend who shows up with snacks when no one else remembered your birthday, the parent who never asked for thanks, only wipes your brow and puts another blanket on your bed when you're already asleep. And yet, its shell isn't just a home, it's a barrier. Cancer knows how to retreat, to protect, to guard the tender things from a world that can be too loud, too sharp, too sudden. In mythology, this kind of strength is often underestimated, until the moment it isn't. You sit again by the sea, a little more thoughtful now. The breeze is colder. A lone gull cries overhead. Somewhere nearby, something scuttles. You're deeper into the story now, drifting just offshore, half dream, half memory. The water around you is warm, darker than ink, but clearer than glass. Beneath the surface, swaying kelp, flickers of silver-scaled fish, and somewhere in the folds of that quiet marine dusk, a small, resolute crab. Not just any crab. This is Karkinos. And yes, that's a name you might have never heard before. But he's about to play a surprisingly big role in one of mythology's most star-studded battles. You're in ancient Greece now, or rather, mythic Greece. The version with gods who meddle like dramatic relatives and heroes who somehow always forget to wear helmets. It's hot. The cicadas are shouting. And over a sunburnt hill, Hercules is charging into his second labor. Slay the Hydra. Ah yes, the Hydra. A swamp-dwelling lizard nightmare with too many heads and a real aversion to dying. For every head Hercules chopped off, 2 more grew in its place. Like a shampoo commercial with a vengeance. But here's the thing, while Hercules gets all the glory, and let's be honest, most of the fan art, it's the bit players that often surprise you. Enter Karkinos, tiny, clawed, uninvited. Depending on which version of the myth you prefer, and there are at least 6, Karkinos is either a loyal pet of Hera, or just a very brave crab having the worst Tuesday of his life. Either way, while Hercules is wrestling the Hydra in a scene that looks like someone threw spaghetti at a blender, Karkinos scuttles up and does something utterly absurd. He bites Hercules on the foot. Let's pause here. This is a demigod. He's swinging a club the size of a wagon. He's decapitating a monster with a neck problem. And this crab? This crab chooses violence. Was it noble? Loyal? Completely pointless? Historians still argue whether Karkinos was meant to be comic relief, a divine assistant, or just an early example of crustacean participation in heroic myth. But what happens next is a blink. Hercules crushes the crab underfoot. Just squish. Brutal? Yes. But this is Greek myth. Everything's a little over the top. Now, if this were a lesser story, that would be the end of our little shell-clad hero. A footnote in the monster-fighting resume of some loincloth legend. But Hera, queen of Olympus and patron saint of holding grudges, sees the whole thing. And for once, she's touched. She lifts Karkinos into the stars. Not because he was strong, not because he won, but because he tried. That's how Cancer, the constellation, was born. a soft echo of defiance, a reminder that even tiny acts of courage deserve to be remembered. And here's the twist. Cancer isn't visible like Orion, isn't bright like Leo. It's subtle. It takes effort to see, just like the crab it honours. Some ancient astronomers even found this endearing. In the Almagest, the 2nd century Greek sky guide written by Ptolemy, Cancer gets just a passing mention. But over time, its very obscurity became part of its allure. Quiet stars for quiet strength. You float now in the dark sea of myth, Carcanos drifting beside you. The night above is dappled with soft light. You realise it doesn't matter that the crab didn't win. The story isn't about victory. It's about loyalty. It's about showing up when it matters, even if no one notices, even if you get flattened by a foot the size of a chariot. The breeze around you whispers through invisible reeds. Something about it feels proud, like the hush after a small, brave thing gets the recognition it never asked for. A fringe theory, barely whispered in a few modern classics departments, suggests that the story of Carcanos wasn't originally about Hercules at all, but an allegory of the moon, the soft white crab underfoot, the one that pulls the tides and is always retreating, only to return again. That maybe the myth was built around an animal people already worshipped, and Hercules was the latecomer. You breathe that in, a myth within a myth. Carcanos doesn't speak. He never has. But if he could, maybe he'd just shrug. Not because he's indifferent, but because he knows what he did. And because sometimes being remembered is enough. You look up again. Cancer sparkles faintly between Gemini and Leo. A shell of light, barely drawn, always watching. And if you squint just right, you can almost see him down there in the tide pool. Still waiting, still guarding, still dreaming of stars. You wade now through a tidal dreamscape where myth and meaning blur like salt on old parchment. The moon's glow threads across the waves like silver embroidery, and the rhythm of the sea is slow like a cradle. It's here that Cancer, the crab, earns his second identity, not as a sidekick or a casualty, but as a sentinel of tides and time. That's right, the sign of Cancer is ruled by the moon, not Mars, not Mercury, not some flashy chariot-riding sun god. The moon, quiet, cyclical, eternal. And that, if you ask ancient astrologers, says everything. You settle into the thought like settling into warm sand. It crunches slightly beneath you, and you can smell seaweed drying in the distance, crisp and earthy. Somewhere, an owl calls out, not quite part of the ocean's world, but close enough for this dreamy in-between space. Back in ancient Babylon, sky watchers didn't just name constellations. They logged their movements, predicted eclipses, and charted connections between the sky and human emotion. Cancer, which crested the horizon at the summer solstice, became a marker of midsummer, heat, harvest, and turning inward. The moon's rulership? It made sense. The moon pulls the tides after all. It changes shape nightly and somehow still feels constant. The moon is introspection, mood, memory. So if Cancer is the sign tied to the moon, it's the sign of protectiveness, of home, of shifting emotion, of soft exteriors and surprisingly strong grips. Just like the crab, who'll seem to scuttle sideways, but never loses focus on its destination. You probably know someone like this. Heck, you might be someone like this. The person who's always checking if everyone's okay, even when they say they don't care. The one who notices when the energy in the room dips, who adjusts the playlist, who tucks the blanket a little closer during movie night. In medieval bestiaries, Crabs don't get a ton of page space, but the few that exist emphasize their persistence, their oddity, their armor. They became symbols of mystery and resilience. There's a delightful fringe theory floating in 13th century French marginalia that the crab's sideways walk was a metaphor for the oblique mysteries of the soul. Translation: emotions don't move in straight lines. Healing doesn't. Grief definitely doesn't. And Cancer, ruled by the moon, is the sign that gets this. You feel that now, don't you? That pull to retreat sometimes, to not charge into things like Aries, but to circle, consider, protect, to build your shell slowly, piece by emotional piece. It's no coincidence that in ancient temple design, many moon deities were depicted with crab-like attributes. Selene in Greece, Khonsu in Egypt, even the Mesopotamian Sin, their moon god, was carved with curving horns, moon-like crescents, and circular motifs that echoed the shape of the crab's shell. Historians still argue whether the moon's link to Cancer arose from coastal mythologies, fisher folk seeing crabs appear during full moons, or agricultural ones marking the midsummer ripeness. Either way, both agree. Cancer's lunar heritage was never about weakness. It was about wisdom, the kind you earn by staying up late, the kind that forms in silence. There's a cave painting in Spain, 20,000 years old, give or take, that shows a half circle with claw-like markings. Some say it's just a doodle. Others insist it was one of the first animal symbol carvings, the moon crab, a guardian of the night. You exhale slowly. The air is softer now. You can almost feel the moon above you, even with your eyes closed, like a hand resting gently on your shoulder. Some ancient astrologers saw Cancer not just as a sign, but as a gate, the gate of men. According to them, this was the celestial point where souls descended from the heavens into life, opposite Capricorn's gate of the gods, where they returned after death. Cancer marked beginnings, birth, incarnation, and suddenly, the crab isn't just a critter with a moontan. It's the threshold keeper, the guardian of the in-between. You blink, and now you're on the shoreline of Alexandria. Not the real one, perhaps, but some dream variant filled with scrolls and moonlight. A scholar is drawing circles in the sand with a rod. He mutters under his breath about Cancer's arc and lunar houses, about tides and temperaments. He's trying to explain why Cancer people always cry at weddings and can't watch animal rescue videos without getting misty-eyed. He's not quite succeeding, but the stars above him seem to nod anyway. And that's the secret, isn't it? Cancer doesn't need to roar. It doesn't need to dazzle. It holds its place, ruled by a celestial body that never rushes, never demands, but always returns, like memory, like a story whispered before sleep, like the tide, touching your toes, even as you pull away. You're standing ankle deep in a tidal pool now, cool water swirling around your feet, reflecting stars overhead, like tiny candles floating in a dark basin. Each ripple seems to whisper a new version of an old tale, and tonight, that tale leads us somewhere unexpected, to Hera. Yes, that Hera, queen of the gods, goddess of marriage, royalty, and very well-documented grudges. You might not immediately think guardian crab when you think of Hera, but trust me, the two are connected in myth, mood, and more than a little moonlit irony. So here's the thing. Hera didn't like Heracles at all. He was the illegitimate child of her husband Zeus and a mortal woman. And while Heracles ran around lifting mountains and solving riddles with his biceps, Hera plotted. She couldn't hurt Zeus, not directly, But Heracles? Fair game. Which brings us to the swampy region of Lerna. Picture it. Reeds rustling in the wind, the surface of the water disturbingly still. And in the middle of it all, Heracles, tasked with slaying the Hydra, a serpent beast with multiple heads that, when cut, would regrow 2 more. Basically a nightmare you'd meet if anxiety had a physical form. And just when the fight couldn't get more absurd, scuttle scuttle, a crab appears. Not a huge one, not glowing or armoured in diamonds, just a regular crab, sent by Hera. According to the myth, it bites Heracles on the foot to distract him, trying to tip the scales in the Hydra's favour. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work. Heracles stomps the crab flat. No noble duel, no second chance, just one quick squish. But here's where the story gets interesting. Instead of ignoring the failed attempt, Hera, touched by the crab's loyalty, places it among the stars. She gives it a constellation, immortality. Cancer is born not in triumph, but in devotion. Historians still argue whether the crab was always part of the myth, or whether it was added later as an astrological backfill. Some say it was a way to soften Hera's image, make her seem less wrathful, more honouring of the small and loyal. Others think the crab was symbolic all along, its role magnified only in retellings. But the heart of the story holds. Sometimes it's not about the victory, it's about the willingness to show up, to guard, to act, even when defeat is certain. You feel it now, don't you? The tiny defiance in that sideways step, the dignity in the gesture, the kind of loyalty that doesn't need reward, but is quietly honoured all the same. There's something profoundly Cancerian about that. The idea that love and courage don't always look dramatic. Sometimes they're quiet, unseen, a moment of protection that goes unthanked, but not unnoticed. And it's not just mythology. Medieval alchemists saw the crab as a sacred animal, connected to the element of water and the lunar cycle. It symbolized return, reflection, and emotional transformation. In alchemical manuscripts, you might find the crab drawn not as a sidekick, but as the midpoint of a cosmic journey where emotion meets endurance. Fringe folklore from coastal Brittany even claimed that crabs could listen to dreams, shuffling near sleeping villages and absorbing their burdens. This probably came from how their eyes seemed to stay open, watchful, even at rest. And that feels like Cancer too, doesn't it? The friend who texts "made you tea" after a rough day. The partner who remembers the exact date your dog died 3 years ago and lights a candle. The cousin who somehow always knows when to call. These are small actions, but they're the fabric of care. And Hera, in a strange divine way, understood that. She saw in the crab something worthy, not of a throne, but of a sky space, a constellation to remind us that even the smallest gestures carry weight. Back in that tidal pool, you reach down and pick up a shell. It's smooth and spiral-shaped, like a fingerprint made of time. You hold it to your ear, half expecting to hear the sea. Instead, you hear silence, but not empty silence, comforting silence, the kind you feel when someone sits with you without needing to fix anything, the kind that says, "I'm here, that's all, and that's enough." Cancer's myth is like that shell, small, missable, but powerful once you hold it close. And in a sky full of thunder gods, flaming chariots, and lion-cloaked warriors, that stillness stands out. Because not every myth is loud. Some whisper, and you're just beginning to listen. The air feels a little warmer now, thick with the scent of brine and memory, as you drift into the coastal city of ancient Greece, perhaps Argos or Athens, long before cruise ships and souvenir shops. You walk past low stone homes and sun-washed terraces, heading toward a small observatory built into a hillside. The sea stretches behind you like a restless mirror, but here, your eyes are pulled upward. And what do they see? A sky carefully mapped by minds who had nothing but time and wonder. Among the many constellations, scratched onto clay tablets and etched into bronze discs, Cancer begins to appear, not just as a shape of stars, but as a symbol woven into daily life. Ancient Greek astronomers didn't just label Cancer with a casual shrug. No, they assigned it a role in the celestial theatre. Cancer was the faintest of the Zodiac's 12 constellations, sitting humbly between the brighter twins of Gemini and the blazing heart of Leo. But what it lacked in sparkle, it made up for in mystery. Its position marked the summer solstice, the sun's highest, most triumphant point in the sky. Pause on that for a second. Cancer, the quiet crab, is the guardian of summer's turning point, the peak of warmth, light, and abundance. That moment before the year tips gently into decline. Historians still argue whether the Greeks picked Cancer for this role because of its lunar ties, its watery temperament, or simply because the stars fit there. But there's poetry in it either way. The unassuming crab, chosen to mark a celestial climax. And even more fascinating, the Greeks believed the sun would pause here. That's what solstice means, sun stopping. They imagined the great golden chariot of Helios slowing in the sky, taking a breath before wheeling back down. Cancer was the hitching post, the pause button, the interlude. Your feet crunch softly now on gravel as you step into the observatory. Really, just a circular platform with an open sky above. There's no telescope, just a low marble plinth covered in scratch marks. Ancient notes carved with obsessive care. A figure stands beside it, robed in indigo, murmuring to themselves, tracing the stars with an ivory pointer. They don't notice you, or maybe they do, and just accept your presence like they accept the wind. The stars are more important. In their notes, you catch glimpses of lunar phases, planetary alignments, star names that still shimmer through our modern tongues. Altaf, Acubens, Acellus Borealis, names that sound like spells or lullabies. Cancer, they record, is ruled by the moon, not in the tyrannical way of Zeus or the blazing command of Apollo. No, the moon rules gently, quietly, with tides and emotions and tides of emotions. A fringe theory whispers through time that the moon, in many ancient cultures, was a stand-in for the divine feminine. Soft power, cyclical strength. And in that light, Cancer becomes more than a crustacean. It becomes a sacred rhythm. Think about it. This constellation governs birth and motherhood, the home and hearth. And its celestial body, the moon, waxes and wanes like breath, like lullabies, like grief and recovery. It's no accident that in many old star maps, Cancer was drawn not just as a crab, but sometimes as a scarab, a beetle, sacred to the Egyptians, which rolled the sun across the sky like a dung ball of hope. Gross? Maybe. Symbolic? Definitely. That connection, crab to beetle, might sound like a stretch. But remember, the ancients didn't separate biology from belief. A creature that moved the same way the sun seemed to move, that was important. That was cosmic. You hear a soft scratching sound now, quill on papyrus. Another scholar, maybe younger, is jotting down notes near the edge of the platform. Their robes are simple, teal-dyed linen. Their ink smells like crushed berries. They glance at you, offer a tired smile, and return to the sky. Above, Cancer arches subtly. Unlike other constellations that boast with arms and weapons and roaring beasts, Cancer barely sketches itself. A sideways V, a cluster, almost hidden. But maybe that's the point. To see Cancer, you have to slow down. Let your eyes adjust, get quiet. And when you finally do, it's there. Isn't that just like emotion? Like love that isn't loud. Like care that doesn't perform. Like strength that holds but doesn't boast. The Greeks, with all their gods and monsters, still made space in the sky for the quiet one. The one who marks the midpoint. The one who guards the hinge. Back on the stone path now, you feel the hush of twilight growing thicker. Somewhere in the city, a lyre plays. Someone laughs. Someone lights a candle and tells a child a bedtime story about a crab who climbed into the sky for love. You smile. Not everything needs to be dramatic to be divine. The sun dips lower behind the hills as you walk away from the observatory, your thoughts still tangled in star names and moon phases. The evening air cools your skin, but your imagination stays warm, stoked by the story of a humble constellation that marks the height of summer. You follow a narrow path now, down toward the coast. The sea glimmers with copper light, its surface rippling with soft wind. In the near distance, torches begin to flicker along the harbour. You wander past the threshold of history again, stepping through time's beaded curtain into the humid dusk of ancient Egypt. You're no longer just a visitor. You're someone expected. Here, under palm-fringed skies and temple shadows, Cancer takes on a different tone. Not just a crab, but a signal, a sign, a sacred pause. The Nile lies before you now, wide and patient. Its waters pulse with the anticipation of flooding, an annual miracle that meant the difference between life and famine. And tucked between all the ceremonies, chants, and watching eyes, the appearance of Cancer in the sky meant one thing. The waters were coming, flood and rebirth. Historians still argue whether the ancients actually used Cancer's heliacal rising, the moment it first appears in the pre-dawn sky, to mark the flood's arrival, or whether it was more a poetic alignment. But it doesn't really matter, does it? They looked up, they waited, they believed. In Egyptian cosmology, crabs didn't get much solo fame, but water-bound creatures? Oh yes. Frogs, fish, scarabs. They were all tiny deities in disguise. The crab, by its nature, tied both to land and water, became a liminal creature, a boundary crosser, a tide walker, like the river itself. You cross a wooden pier now, barefoot, listening to the hush of waves lapping the supports. A priest in a linen kilt dips a staff into the water and murmurs something to the moon, high above. On the far bank, figures in saffron robes kneel beside the reeds, placing lotus blossoms in the current. These aren't just rituals, they're conversations. The stars above and the flood below are in dialogue, and Cancer, it's the punctuation, the brief stillness between sentence and breath. You pause too. The world feels suspended. It's in that moment you remember a detail from earlier. Cancer's constellation includes a cluster of stars called the beehive, or praesepe, the manger, the cradle. Even now, in modern astronomy, the beehive cluster sits like a hidden treasure in the heart of Cancer, a faint glowing nest of stars. The symbolism practically writes itself, doesn't it? A cradle in the sky, a shelter for the weary, a celestial womb. Ancient stargazers didn't have the same telescopes we do, but they had patience and faith. And when they looked at that dim part of the sky and saw it glow, just faintly, they didn't shrug. They leaned in. They imagined stories there. One fringe theory suggests that the beehive was used as a weather omen. If you could see it clearly, the skies would stay dry. If it vanished, storms were coming. No one's sure where that started, or whether it was ever truly believed. But as you stand now beside a sacred river under a watching sky, you can see how tempting it would be. The stars, after all, aren't just decoration, they're memory. And Cancer, for all its modesty, is loaded with meaning. Cradle, flood, moon, womb, tide. The ancient Egyptians didn't name it Cancer, of course. That's a Roman hand-me-down. But the stars were still there, still whispering. You walk now into a temple. It's stone cool underfoot. The walls are painted in deep teal and ochre. Scenes of gods and kings, wrapped in coils of serpents, crowned with sun discs. There, among the hieroglyphs, a familiar shape appears. Not a crab exactly, but a looping, curling creature with pincers. Possibly a scorpion, possibly a beetle, possibly Cancer, waiting to be named. Names come and go, but the forms stay. You trail your fingers along the carvings, letting your fingertips gather dust older than language. And somewhere in the background, a woman's voice begins to chant. A lullaby, maybe, or a hymn. The melody is minor and meandering, like a river taking its time. That's how Cancer moves. Not in leaps or charges, but sideways, patient, tidal, circular. Think about that for a moment. Every other zodiac sign charges forward. Rams, bulls, lions, archers. But Cancer waits. Cancer watches. Cancer curls around what matters and holds tight. There's a strength in that. The kind of strength people underestimate until they need it. You sit now at the temple threshold, looking out at the moon reflected on the Nile. The stars are clearer here, brighter than they were in Greece. You find the constellation again, not by force, but by permission. It reveals itself when you stop trying. And as you gaze up, a thought unfurls. What if Cancer's magic isn't in brightness or boldness, but in refuge? In being a place, a time, a season where it's okay to stop, to breathe, to flood, to heal. That's what the Egyptians seem to know. That what protects us doesn't always shout. Sometimes it flows. Sometimes it rocks us like water. Sometimes it just waits. And maybe that's enough. You rise slowly from the temple's cool threshold, your limbs moving like reeds stirred by a soft current. The Nile behind you sighs against the banks, a sound that lingers even as you step away, back into the shifting corridors of time. You're headed west now, west in spirit, not in miles. The centuries turn like parchment under your fingers, and when they settle, you're somewhere in Rome. Not the marble-clad Rome of emperors and victory arches. This is a Rome of ordinary stargazers and practical calendars, of street vendors squinting at the sky and philosophers arguing over star charts while sipping bitter wine. Here, Cancer has a name and a place. You find yourself in a domed chamber, candles flickering against frescoed walls. It's a scholar's study, crammed with scrolls and ink pots, where dusty volumes lie open to reveal constellations inked with meticulous care. One diagram draws your eye, the familiar arc of the Zodiac, traced with silver leaf. Cancer nestled between Gemini and Leo, like a secret kept between seasons. The Roman obsession with categorizing time is fully on display here. Days, months, star risings, all neatly divided, labelled, and referenced. Julius Caesar's calendar reform may not seem romantic, but it changed everything. Time got cleaner. The sun stayed in its lane, and tucked into those freshly carved months, July and August, now named for powerful men, Cancer quietly ruled the days when the heat crested and nothing stirred. Historians still argue whether the early astrologers saw Cancer as a sign of comfort or caution. The season it ruled was both, rich in harvests, but heavy with heat. Things grew fast, but tempers frayed. It was a time to rest or risk burnout. And Cancer, the sign, seemed to know this. It wasn't urging anyone forward. It was telling them to pause. You lean over the scholar's shoulder now, watching as he dips a stylus into ink made from crushed berries. He doesn't flinch when the candle gutters. He simply steadies it with his hand and continues tracing a crab across the margin of his chart. 8 legs, curved claws, and a small stylized shell like a dome overhead. It's not realistic. It's not meant to be. It's symbolic. In this moment, Cancer isn't a creature. It's an emblem, a season, a sanctuary. The scholar mutters something about domicilium lunae, Cancer, the home of the moon. You feel that phrase settle in your chest. It's poetic, yes, but also practical. In Roman astrology, every planet had a home, a sign it felt most at ease in. And for the moon, that home was Cancer. Not a battlefield, a home. You step back and blink, and the scene shifts. Now you're in a Roman bathhouse, warm and echoing, with steam curling toward the mosaic ceiling. Laughter rings out from a corner as someone dunks beneath a copper spout. And yet, even here, amid the banter and bath oil, Cancer makes an appearance. Etched into a fountain's rim, you see it again, the crab, this time flanked by the symbols of water and the moon. Decorative, sure, but also intentional. The Romans understood relaxation as an act of balance, heat offset by cool water, motion balanced by stillness. Cancer, by its seasonal placement and elemental association, became a kind of guardian of that balance. A quiet reminder, even in the middle of a spa day, that self-care wasn't new. You lounge beside the pool, letting the voices blur. Through a high window, the early stars emerge, one by one. You spot Cancer again, faint and unassuming. No flashy bursts of light, no heroic posture, just presence. Somewhere outside this bathhouse, in a dusty forum, someone is making speeches. Somewhere, a legion is marching. Somewhere, a senator is plotting. But here is where Cancer lives. Not in conquest, but in continuity. It strikes you that in all these centuries, Cancer never changed its core identity. Other constellations played both villain and hero, slayer and slain, god and beast. But Cancer? Cancer was always what it was, a small, soft-shelled guardian of the margins. And maybe that's why it survived. Because no one saw it as a threat. Because it didn't demand the spotlight. Because its story didn't hinge on victory, but on presence. You dry your hands on a linen cloth, the edges embroidered with Zodiac symbols, and walk once more into night. Rome hums behind you. The stars above wheel on in silence. You pause to look again at Cancer. It's still hard to spot without guidance. Even ancient sky watchers sometimes mistook it for nothing at all. But the moment you know where to look, it appears. And that, you realize, is the secret. Cancer is the kind of sign that waits to be found. Not flashy, not loud, but constant. You smile, just slightly, and keep walking. The air shifts again. Warm Roman bars fading into cooler breezes. Your feet touch sand now, soft and pale, as if you've stepped onto a shoreline just before dawn. You're still in the ancient world, but far from marble and empire. You've arrived in a quieter place, Alexandria. It's early morning here, the city not yet awake. The library looms in the distance, shrouded in mist and centuries of myth. Lamps flicker low along narrow alleys, their light catching on bits of pottery and curled scrolls. But you're not headed toward the grand archives just yet. Instead, you drift toward a low observatory on the edge of the harbour. The air smells of brine and olive oil, and far off, you hear gulls calling over merchant ships. You enter the observatory as quietly as a tide washing in. Inside, a pair of scholars sit cross-legged on woven mats, facing the sea through an arched opening in the stone. One of them lifts a stylus and begins to trace slow curves onto a wax tablet, lines that resemble constellations, though not quite the ones you know. Cancer is there though, like a tiny stitch in a greater tapestry. Just 5 dim stars, but drawn with reverence. These Alexandrian scholars aren't just naming stars, they're translating them. Blend in Babylonian wisdom, Egyptian cycles, and Greek logic into something new, something unified, something perhaps eternal. One scholar speaks softly of the moon, not as a goddess or a light in the sky, but as a clock, a rhythm, a presence that pulls tides and tempers and hidden tears from sleeping faces. The other chuckles, saying something about lunar madness and poets who can't hold their wine. You smile. Some debates really never change. Historians still argue whether Cancer's association with the moon predates Alexandria or was formalized here. But regardless, the bond deepened in this very city, where ideas met like ocean currents, shaping each other over time. You peer over a scroll they've unrolled, a lunar chart, complex and delicate. There, in faded ink, is Cancer again, drawn beside the moon's phases. Above it, the symbol of water, a downward triangle, simple and elemental. It's strange, you think. How something so small, 5 faint stars, barely visible, could have earned a place in the heavens, could carry meanings across languages, across empires, across centuries. But then you remember the tide, Cancer's season, its mood, its moon. It's all about pull, the subtle kind, not a lion's roar or a thunderclap, a hush, a tug, a whisper that turns your head before you even notice it. You step outside, the light growing gold as the sun approaches. Along the harbour, fishers begin to stir, their boats creaking softly against the docks. And there, just for a moment, you see a crab scuttling sideways across a patch of sand, leaving a trail like hieroglyphs. You watch it disappear under a rock. It didn't ask to be seen. It didn't need applause. You walk on. Later, you find yourself inside the great library. Yes, the famous one. A cool, echoing hall lined with papyrus scrolls, stone tablets, and enough dust to write your name in. The librarian nods at you silently, motioning to a corner where Zodiac texts rest like sleeping cats. You unfurl a brittle scroll, Cancer again, this time drawn not as a crab, but as a mother figure, arms curved like claws, shielding a child. Another depicts it as a humble hut beneath waves, sheltering light from a storm. These aren't astronomical renderings. They're interpretations, emotional truths disguised as symbols. One scroll, half burnt, includes a strange notation in the margins. Cancer, the gateway. That's it, no explanation. A gateway to what? To summer? To emotion? To the moon? Or maybe to something simpler? A gateway inward. a pause between seasons, a place to rest before the heat of Leo. You sit with that thought a while. In the quiet, you hear a scholar nearby reciting poetry, verse written to the moon, comparing its glow to silver olives and wet river stones. He stumbles on a line, chuckles, and rewrites it. You think of all the people, over all the centuries, who've whispered to the sky without expecting answers. It's enough to make you feel both very small and very connected. Cancer does that, reminds you that strength can be found in softness, that mystery doesn't always demand solving, that stories, like shells, sometimes protect something tender inside. As the day blooms into heat, the library darkens slightly. Heavy shutters close to protect the scrolls from the sun. You take one last look at the diagrams before slipping out, back into the harbour air. The city pulses gently now, its rhythm like a heartbeat wrapped in parchment and tide. You pause at the edge of the water. The waves glint pink and gold. And though the stars are gone, hidden by daylight, you know where Cancer is. It's still up there, always is, just waiting for the dark, waiting to be remembered. You stand now on a stretch of unfamiliar coastline, not Alexandria anymore. The sand is darker, the sky flatter, like the sun has forgotten how to dazzle. And there's something colder in the wind, something northern. Welcome to the shores of early medieval Britain. The year is uncertain, but the quiet tells you it's long before noisy kingdoms and crowded churches. Here, fishermen work by hand, hauling nets heavy with wriggling silver, while families gather around peat fires with seaweed drying on racks nearby. The air smells of salt, wool, and something like boiled barley. You walk slowly inland, up a hill spotted with sheep and windflowers. At the top stands a modest stone structure, half shrine, half lookout. Inside, a monk leans over a carved wooden desk, copying something by candlelight. You peek in. He doesn't notice you. And there, inked onto a square of calfskin parchment, is a circle of stars. Cancer among them. Tiny, careful, mysterious. A crab in profile, drawn with faint, precise lines and labelled with Latin so old it leans more toward prayer than science. He's not writing astronomy, he's writing devotion. To him, these stars aren't just coordinates, they're expressions of divine order. Each sign, a symbol, each constellation, a reminder that God, or the cosmos, depending on who's sponsoring the scriptorium, is watching from above. Historians still argue whether early Christian monks genuinely embraced astrological thought or merely repurposed it to fit theological frameworks. But it's clear that the stars made their way into monasteries all the same, quietly, like monks themselves. This monk adds a splash of blue to the crab, indigo, faded at the edges, not for realism, for reverence. He leans back, flexing his fingers, and mutters something under his breath that sounds like a mixture of scripture and sea lore. You catch a word, Kustos, the guardian. You step outside as a bell tolls in the distance, signalling prayer or maybe supper. Down the hill, small figures scurry to tend goats or stoke coals. The crab may not be loud, but here under skies as wide as the question of heaven, it watches over a world just beginning to write again. Later, you wander through a village. Cob walls, straw roofs, wooden doors hung askew. A woman in a saffron kerchief stirs a pot beside her home, her toddler playing with carved shells in the dust. Not toys, talismans. She holds one up and murmurs something, placing it on a tiny altar wedged between stones. Cancer in this life isn't a constellation. It's a household guardian, a spirit of water, womb, and warding, one that keeps the winds soft and the children healthy. You realize with a flicker of awe that this myth, the crab, the sign, the idea of Cancer, has travelled without ever needing a passport. It slips from temple to scroll, from observatory to soup pot, taking on the flavour of each place it touches. That's what myths do. They don't just endure, they adapt. You head toward the coast again, where a small boat rests upside down like a sleeping beast. A sailor mends his sail, humming a tune that might have belonged to druids once, or maybe just to his grandmother. Around his neck is a small pendant, weathered bronze, shaped roughly like a crescent moon. He catches you looking and smiles. "Moon watches water," he says in a thick dialect. "Water watches us." Simple. You nod, and the phrase curls in your chest like steam from a cup of something hot and honest. The moon, Cancer, the tides, protection, they're all wrapped together in this northern air, like a bundle of dried herbs tied with faith. By twilight, you're walking along cliffs, the sea far below churning like a restless dream. Stars begin to poke through the indigo veil above, and there, yes, there is Cancer again, faint, quiet, but present. 5 stars that don't demand to be seen. They wait. They hum with old names and older meanings. They know your return. You sit on a flat rock, cloak drawn tight around your shoulders. The wind lifts your hair, and you find yourself thinking of how many have sat like this, over centuries, over continents. Eyes tilted up, hearts cracked open just enough to let a little starlight in. They weren't all scholars. They weren't all poets. Some were just tired people looking for reassurance, a signal, a pattern, something that says, yes, this moment matters, even in the dark, even if no one sees. And you, quiet as that crab drawn in medieval ink, are part of it now. The hush deepens, the wind softens, and somewhere, beneath your ribs, you feel the pulse of Regulus again. Not the Leo star this time, but your own. Your own light, steadied by story, warmed by myth, ready to move with the tides. You stay there a while longer, listening, breathing, watching the stars blink into place like old friends returning home. You wake to the sound of gulls, not sharp, shrieking gulls, but low, echoing ones, as if carried from the mouth of a distant cave. The world is no longer a thatched roof village or a monk's scriptorium. It's grander now, richer in pigment, louder in ambition. You've stepped into the high courts of Renaissance Italy. Florence glitters under the morning sun. Copper rooftops, pale stone facades, and banners the colour of wine ripple in the breeze. And somewhere, below the buzz of trade and song, the old symbols hum to themselves. Cancer walks here too, but not in the margins. Here the crab is frescoed across villa ceilings, painted into Zodiac cycles and palace chambers, woven into tapestries the size of walls, and always, always beneath the silver curve of the moon. You find yourself standing in a round room lined with dark wood and ivory inlaid cabinets. A scholar, all robes and rings, leans over a celestial globe. His finger circles Cancer's section. His voice, calm and honeyed, is explaining something to a child sitting cross-legged at his feet. Not just a sign, he says, but a symbol of return, of retreat, of protection. When the moon is in Cancer, even kings feel the urge to stay home. The child wrinkles her nose. That's boring. The scholar grins. Maybe, but boring saves lives. You can't help but smile. Historians still argue whether Renaissance astrologers truly believed the stars held power, or simply enjoyed the elaborate charts and poetic logic. But the Medicis and their like didn't build observatories for fun. They believed, or needed to believe, that heaven had something to say about their fates. And Cancer? In a world where alliances shift and daggers glitter under cloaks, a sign that speaks of loyalty, caution, and hearth would feel like a secret ally. Outside, in the piazza, artists sip wine and argue about perspective. One of them sketches the Zodiac onto a notebook, placing Cancer not as a crab, but as a spiraled shell. Protection, memory, return, all curled inward like a poem or a prayer. And above this world of velvet cloaks and candlelight banquets, the moon glides through her phases, quiet, constant, luminous, still ruling the sign, still guiding the tides, still watching. You pause at the edge of a fountain where water curls around a marble crab carved into the stone, not roaring like a lion, not leaping like a fish, just there, firm, still, watching. You walk again, this time into a small cluttered room with windows that stretch high into the vaulted ceiling. Star maps blanket the walls. A cat sleeps on a stack of horoscopes. And in the middle, a woman with ink-stained fingers adjusts a chart made of gears, wood, and patience. She murmurs to herself as she plots planetary movement, muttering Cancer rising and waxing moon like ingredients for a potion. She doesn't notice you, but you notice her. This is what the Renaissance did best. It turned mythology into machinery, poetry into clockwork, meaning into maps. Even the crab became precision, but not entirely. In one corner of the room stands a painting, small, rougher than the others. A child, curled beneath the stars, and behind them, a crab with outstretched legs form in a shelter. No caption, no title, just a feeling that maybe, in the chaos of golden ages and sudden betrayals, someone remembered that Cancer wasn't about cleverness. It was about care. You step out into the garden where the moon is rising early, pale in the summer sky. Vines twist along latticework. Lemon trees cast sharp shadows on stone. And in the distance, someone begins to play a soft melody on a lute. You sit by a sundial, edged with all 12 zodiac signs, your finger trailing the lines until it lands again on Cancer. The crab, the homebody, the moonchild, the myth that never needed to shout to be remembered. That's something the Renaissance rediscovered in its thirst for beauty and pattern and grandeur, that even the quietest myths can shine with elegance when given enough gold leaf and candlelight. You let the music swell. Let your breathing match the rhythm of vines stirring in the breeze, and feel the story stretch across time again. From Babylonian priests to Florentine scholars, from ink to fresco, from lunar charts to lullabies, Cancer remains. And maybe, just maybe, you're beginning to understand why. The air grows cooler as you wander onward, not with winter, but with quiet, with stillness. You've crossed through gilded courts and into something softer now. Welcome to the world of folk belief. It's not painted in marble or charted with sextants. It's whispered, passed from grandmother to grandchild by firelight. Here, Cancer is no longer a noble crest or astrological key. It's a story by the hearth, a creature of the shoreline, the woods, the water's edge, a guardian told in tales to keep children safe and dreams gently strange. You find yourself beside a seaside cottage, the kind built from grey stone and thatched roof, where the wind hums against the walls like a lullaby. Inside, candles flicker low, and someone is telling a story. You crouch quietly in the corner, unseen but present, the way dreams often are. And so, the crab left its shell behind, the storyteller says, voice low and lilting. Not because it wanted to, but because someone else needed it more. That's what guardians do. The listeners, a circle of sleepy-eyed children, nod solemnly. One clutches a worn toy crab made of red wool. Another draws spirals in the soot-dusted floor with a fingertip. Outside, the sea murmurs against the rocks. Salt is in the air, and the moon, oh the moon, is full tonight. Its light pours through the window like silver ink, spilling across the floor in soft arcs. Historians still argue whether these rural traditions count as real astrology or just colourful superstition. But that's missing the point. Because while cities map the stars with ink and argument, these villages map them with feeling, with instinct, with dream logic. And Cancer thrived here, not just as a zodiac sign, but as a symbol of home, of retreat, of the magic that comes not from conquest, but from stillness. One folktale from the Scottish Isles tells of a moon crab that crawls into people's dreams during harvest season, leaving behind messages written in sand. If the dreamer remembers the message, good fortune follows. If not, well, better luck next moon. You wander further, into a meadow lined with wild thyme and foxglove. A woman in a russet cloak gathers herbs under moonlight. She hums as she works, fingers deft and confident. A wicker basket swings from her elbow, and beside her walks a small child with painted shell charms hanging from their belt. She pauses at a small stone altar, ancient, weathered, and places a tiny offering, lavender, salt, and a crab's claw painted silver, for luck, for homecoming, for the tides. You watch as she whispers a rhyme, barely audible over the wind. Guard the door and hold the light, moon shell strong through storm and night. It's not science, it's not doctrine, but it is sacred. In parts of Eastern Europe, Cancer was once thought to be a creature that guarded buried treasure. Not gold, but memories, ancestors, names that would otherwise be lost to time. So people left little offerings at shoreline caves, polished stones, carved wood, shell buttons. Cancer, they said, would remember you. And that's what these stories all circle back to. Memory. Not just the act of remembering, but the power of being remembered. Even now, in some places, it's customary to leave a crab shell charm near a newborn's bed. Not for luck exactly, but to ask the moon to watch, to hold, to keep. You pass another cottage, this one lit only by the glow of embers. Inside, an old man writes in a leather-bound journal, his quill soft on the page. The window beside him frames the sea, and above it, the stars. Cancer curls gently in the sky, a quiet constellation of belonging. The man pauses. He looks up, and though he can't see you, he whispers, "Still there, are you?" Yes, you think. Still here, still watching. Because in this part of the myth, you're not just an observer. You're part of the remembering. The folk world never needed your belief, only your presence. A crab doesn't chase, it waits, it watches, it guards what others leave behind. And sometimes, that's enough to keep a myth alive for centuries. You leave behind the cottage and the field, stepping gently into deeper night. But it doesn't feel darker, just quieter. The kind of quiet that hushes your breath and slows your step. You're walking through time now, not across land. Each footfall lands in centuries, not seconds. And ahead, Renaissance Europe. You may be expecting silk gowns, dramatic frescoes, and someone reciting Plato in a garden. And you'd be right. But tonight, we're not visiting the courtly centre of it all. We're drifting into the libraries and studios, the places where knowledge, both mystical and mathematical, was painted into existence. And there, between pages of ink and stars, Cancer has taken on yet another form. You find yourself in a vaulted study lit by the steady flicker of oil lamps. The ceiling overhead is a map of the night sky, hand-painted and trimmed with faded gold. Below it, a scholar in a teal doublet leans over a massive sheet of vellum, compass in one hand, brush in the other. The crab is coming to life again, this time with ink, patience, and calculated strokes. But it's no ordinary crab. It has the symmetry of geometry, the flourish of artistry, and a twinkle of mischief in its many legs. It stands in the corner of a circular zodiac chart, tucked near Leo's tail and Gemini's last breath. Because during the Renaissance, Cancer was more than myth. It was a math problem, a clock, a symbol painted into cathedrals, woven into tapestries, and debated in letters between astronomers and alchemists. Here's your historical fact of the night. In the mid-1500s, the Tropic of Cancer, the line of latitude marking the sun's northernmost point at summer solstice, was named not just for celestial placement, but because, at the time, the sun was in the Cancer constellation when it reached that point. It isn't anymore, thanks to something called axial precession. But the name stuck, like most stubbornly poetic things do. The man with the brush mutters about time and stars. He dots a point near Cancer's heart and scrawls beside it in Latin, Domus Lunae, the moon's home, because Renaissance astrologers believed Cancer wasn't just ruled by the moon. It embodied it, its moods, its tides, its contradictions, soft and fierce, still and watchful. You pass the open pages of a Renaissance bestiary, each animal given a full illustration and a full moral. The lion is still roaring, the goat still climbing, and Cancer, well, Cancer is curled protectively around an orb of light, a pearl, a moon, a soul. It's not labelled, because sometimes meaning was left open on purpose. Interpretation was part of the ritual. There's an anecdote, likely apocryphal but charming, of a Venetian merchant who wore a silver crab brooch on his cloak for luck. He claimed it helped him navigate storms and difficult trade deals. When asked why a crab, he said, "Because it moves backward, but always finds its way." Historians still argue whether the merchant actually existed, or whether he was created by the kind of Renaissance writers who loved moralizing after a bottle of red wine. But again, the truth matters less than the story's staying power. You enter a new chamber now, this one filled with maps, star maps, some etched on copper plates, others painted on silk. Cancer looks different in each one. Some versions give it extra claws, some make it curl like a fern, some barely render it at all, a quiet dot pattern between louder signs. But all of them keep it, even the flamboyant ones, even the ones gilded like royal proclamations. They know Cancer's place in the sky. Quiet doesn't mean forgettable. A scholar nearby adjusts his lens. It's an early telescope, more pipe than precision, but he's trying to see what's always been there. Strange, he murmurs. It never moves, and yet it changes. He could be talking about the stars, or the myth, or you, because just like Cancer in the Renaissance, you're evolving too. Less concerned with who you've been, and more with how you see. You don't need a telescope to spot meaning now. You've trained your vision, and that's what the Renaissance gave Cancer, a mirror to reflect meaning outward, to let the signs speak through ink, silk, and song. It made Cancer legible, not loud, not obvious, but present, a constant. One scholar even wrote that Cancer governed the deep waters of the soul, a phrase that got copied into over a dozen texts in the 1600s, mostly by monks who probably never saw a real crab in their lives. But they felt it, that pull, that shell-bound strength. You glance upward one more time. The vaulted ceiling above you is painted not just with stars, but with stories, lines connecting nothing into everything, Cancer among them, curled and glowing. No roar, no fanfare, just presence. The ceiling fades to sky now, and you're no longer beneath a painted dome. You're outside again, your feet brushing dew-damp grass, your breath rising in small clouds. It's early morning, not quite dawn, and the world is suspended in that silvery hush between darkness and light. Somewhere in the distance, a bird considers singing. Somewhere closer, you imagine the sea breathing, out there, past the fields, waiting for the sun. But you're thinking about Cancer. Not the sign this time, but the creature. The real crab, small, armoured, sidestepping through tide pools, resilient, quiet, utterly necessary. And you realise you've never really watched a crab, have you? So let's do that. You crouch by a tide pool rim, in a place that could be Cornwall or Crete, or anywhere the sea meets stone. The water is glassy, the surface flickering with faint moonlight. Beneath it, life pulses, small darting fish, anemones that pulse like sleepy dreams. And there's Cancer. Well, not the Cancer, just a crab, round, rust-coloured, just a few inches wide. He moves with care and strategy, ducking beneath a rock shelf, antennae twitching, claws pausing at the edge of shadow. He doesn't know about constellations. He doesn't care about Hercules, and he certainly doesn't read horoscopes. But here he is, doing what crabs do, surviving, balancing boldness with safety, being small but sure. Mainstream historical fact for today. In ancient Egypt, crabs weren't just zodiacal metaphors. They were part of coastal life and religious symbolism. In some temple carvings, crabs appear as protective spirits of the Nile's bounty, connected to the moon's rhythms and the flood's timing. Which brings us to something charmingly weird. One fringe theory suggests the sign of Cancer may have originally represented a scarab beetle, not a crab at all. The ancient Greek word karkanos meant crab, but before that, the symbol in Egyptian cosmology may have signified the beetle, another creature with a round shape, moon-like life cycles, and a hard shell. Historians still argue whether that etymological shift was intentional, mistranslated, or part of a larger symbolic migration across cultures. But you can't deny the visual rhyme. Round body, tucked legs, protective armour. And the symbolism, still potent. Because tonight, well, this morning, Cancer isn't a story. It's a rhythm. A pattern you can trace in the waves, in the stars, and in the soft way your heart tightens at the thought of home. You walk a little farther, tracing the edge of the coastline. Seaweed clings to rocks like ancient scrolls. Gulls spiral above, catching air currents like forgotten spells. The ocean, that great unfathomable library of life, opens to you with each step, and on a rise overlooking it all, a weathered stone carving. It's a crab, not realistic, but stylized, almost heraldic. Someone long ago carved it into the bluff, marking a spot that meant something. Maybe a boundary, maybe a prayer, maybe just a reminder. Because Cancer, for many seafaring cultures, became a symbol of guidance, of lunar calendars, of safety in storms. and in some cases, of longing, the pull to return to where you began. It's funny how something so small and quiet could mean so much. You run your fingers over the grooves of the carving. The stone is cool, but not cold. The kind of texture that makes you whisper without realizing it. And in that whisper, you feel the myth again. Not as a battle or a throne, but as a stillness, a watching, a presence. You think of the people who've stood here before you, centuries apart, but all tracing that same shape. Maybe one was a mother, hoping the tides would turn. Maybe another was a navigator, grateful for moonlight and luck. Maybe one was just like you, tired, hopeful, quiet, looking for something to hold on to. And that's what Cancer gives. Not a sword, not a roar, but an anchor. You step back. The sky is beginning to soften now, the first wash of colour bleeding into the horizon. The stars don't vanish. They just retreat, gracefully, leaving behind memory and myth. Cancer fades too. Not because it's gone, but because it's part of everything now. Folded into story, sky, and sea. And just before you leave the coastline, you catch sight of one last crab perched on a rock, claws lifted toward the light like a small priest blessing the day. You smile. He doesn't wave back, but he doesn't need to. He's there, watching, just like always. The light sharpens just slightly, and you find yourself walking inland now, away from the salt-kissed rocks and sleepy tide pools, into a garden enclosed by low stone walls. It's quiet here, the kind of quiet that lets you hear bees working, the kind of quiet that holds you gently between memory and morning. This garden feels timeless. Lavender bushes lean lazily toward a gravel path. Rosemary and thyme release perfume beneath your steps. A fig tree stretches, half asleep, into a sky that is slowly turning watercolour blue. You pause at a stone bench, cracked but sturdy. It faces a small reflecting pool, its surface still. You can't help but notice how the water mirrors everything: sky, leaves, and you. For a moment, you stare, watching your own blinking reflection. Cancer, the sign, is tied to water. Not just oceans or storms or deep wells of emotion, but this too: stillness, reflection, the kind of water that shows you yourself, even when you're not sure who you're looking for. You lean back, eyes half closed, and think of all the stories Cancer has passed through, from Babylonian charts to Greek bestiaries, from Egyptian star maps to medieval manuscripts, and now into gardens, apps, the memes, birthday cards, one sign, 1,000 forms. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the Renaissance, the Zodiac signs became a favourite subject of artists and astronomers alike. Cancer often appeared on astrolabes and zodiacal calendars, carved with astonishing detail. One Italian example from the 15th century shows a crab etched beside a full moon, surrounded by roses and soft script, linking Cancer to femininity, moon cycles, and fertility. But here's the quirky twist. In some medieval manuscripts, the artist clearly didn't know what a crab looked like. Cancer is drawn as a lobster, or a two-tailed fish, or even a hedgehog with attitude. There's one particularly charming example where the crab resembles a potato with legs. Clearly, anatomical accuracy wasn't the goal. The meaning mattered more than the model. Historians still argue whether these artistic variations were due to regional fauna, misunderstandings, or symbolic layering. Perhaps the artists were playing it safe, drawing creatures they had actually seen. Or maybe they knew that the symbol was more powerful than the shell. You brush your fingers along a curling vine, its tendrils reaching toward your wrist like curious green scribbles. And you think about all the things you haven't said lately, all the moments you've kept quiet, the feelings you packed away neatly, the brave face, the steady nod, the late nights sitting in your own tide pool of thoughts. That's Cancer too. Not the shell, but the softness inside it. You glance up at the sky. Fewer stars now, but if you squint, you can almost see the arc of the constellation. Cancer isn't made of bright stars like Leo or Orion. It's subtle, dim. You have to know where to look. But isn't that the point? Some things, some people, don't announce themselves. They wait, they stay, they hold space. You rise from the bench and wander through the garden, passing rows of lavender and poppies, now opening to the sun. The air is golden pink, wrapped in early warmth. Somewhere nearby, someone is lighting a cooking fire. You smell rosemary and something sweet, maybe figs, maybe just the past. And through all of it, you sense that the story is slowing, not ending, just softening. Because Cancer isn't a grand finale. It's the pause before the next act, the deep breath, the quiet resolve, the comfort in knowing that protection doesn't have to be loud. You reach a gate at the far end of the garden. It's old wood, iron hinged, with a carving just barely visible, a crescent moon cradling a crab. You trace the shape with one fingertip, and the wood feels warm, familiar. You don't know who carved it, but you're glad they did. You open the gate, step through, and feel the story follow you, not clinging, but walking beside you like an old friend. You follow the path beyond the gate as it begins to descend, slowly at first, then curling downward in a spiral of soft steps. Each footfall presses into dew-damp earth, and overhead, the first birds have begun to murmur. You're not alone in this dawn, though the world feels hushed enough that you could be. Somewhere far behind you now is the roar of the sea, the snapping tide, the salt-bright fury of the early myth. But here, the story has grown smaller, more intimate, and so have your thoughts. This is the part where the myth quiets, not in defeat, but in completion. The Cancer you followed, from its ancient tides to its heavenly arc, is no longer just a crab or a constellation or a zodiac sign. It is a way of being, a guardian, yes, but not always in the heroic sense. Cancer protects in quieter ways, by remembering, by listening, by holding what others drop, sometimes for years, by being the place people come back to when the world gets loud. You stop at the curve of the path, where a low stone wall overlooks a valley now touched by early gold. Far in the distance, smoke rises from chimney tops. The day is beginning, and yet you remain in this in-between space, half in dream, half in dawn. Here's your final mainstream historical fact. The word zodiac comes from the Greek zoidiakos kyklos, meaning a circle of little animals. Cancer, the crab, is one of the oldest known figures in that circle, appearing on Mesopotamian star lists as early as 400 BCE. Back then, it was sometimes associated not with crabs, but turtles, creatures that also carry their homes, their protection, on their backs. Over time, the crab won out, likely because of its sideways movement, its armored shell, its connection to both water and moonlight. But here's something stranger. In the 17th century, when Western astrology was falling out of favour in scientific circles, some scholars argued that the emotional qualities linked to Cancer, nurturing, protectiveness, hypersensitivity, were too feminine to be of cosmic importance. They preferred signs with clearer edges, bolder myths, louder stories. And yet, here we are, still telling Cancer's tale. Historians still argue whether the enduring power of this sign comes from the myth itself, or from something deeper and more human, the need to feel protected, to know that someone, somewhere, is keeping watch, even if it's just a faint cluster of stars curled in the sky. You think of all the Cancers you've known, maybe even the one inside you, the friend who always packs snacks for everyone else, the sibling who checks the locks twice before bed, the parent who says, "Text me when you get there," the stranger who hands you a napkin when you're holding back tears in public. The guardian isn't always brave in battle. Sometimes they're just there, without applause, without armor, just a presence, a tide that always returns. You feel the softness return to your limbs now, the long pull of sleep uncoiling again behind your ribs. The valley is warming, the sky is pearling. You've walked through time tonight, through Babylon, through Greece, through gardens and stars and mythologies, folded like notes between pages. And all along the way, Cancer has been there, watching, waiting, not loud, not proud, but steady. You place a hand on the stone wall, feel the cool lichen beneath your palm, and know it's time to rest, time to let the myth fade, not into silence, but into memory. Time to return home, to your own shell, your own sky, your own place in the pattern. And as your breath slows, you think, the story isn't over. It just goes quiet. Let everything soften now. Let your thoughts loosen, like laces at the end of the day. Let them drift, light as mist, away from the edges of your mind and toward that wide, gentle hush waiting just beyond sleep. The lion had his crown, the crab had a tides, and you, tonight, you had a journey, one stitched in stars, shaped by story, and carried gently across centuries. A myth that didn't roar, one that whispered instead. Even now, as the night leans into its last breath and the world begins to stir on the other side of dawn, you are still wrapped in the rhythm of that tale, the slow lap of waves, the turn of constellations, the pulse of memory. Let your limbs go heavy now, like driftwood carried to shore. Let your breathing fall into step with the earth's own tempo, deep even, unhurried. You are not alone. The sky that guided sailors and dreamers, the sign that stood watch for centuries, is above you still, not demanding, not judging, simply shining. Cancer remains, and so do you. So sleep now, softly. Let go of today. Let the quiet hold you, the story cradle you, the stars guide you into rest. And may you wake not just refreshed, but remembered,